All right, guys, we are back with another Q&A this week. We're going to discuss a topic that is discussed a lot in the bodybuilding realm, and that is peaking strategy, specifically looking at carbs versus fats during this time peaking of the show. So I think the first consideration that we're going to kick off with is like the initial diet setup, like where you are leading into peak.
Yeah, so people say, should you be using carbs or fats, but going through the dieting process, you should have already been learning along the way what type of diet pattern or macronutrient distribution is working very well for you. So I have everything in between, and there's not a wrong, completely wrong answer as far as should you be doing a little bit higher carbs or a little bit, higher in fats. But along that dieting process, you should say like, okay, I'm doing really well with high carbs and lower fats, and I have a preference to push people towards that because carbohydrates are our main fuel source during weight training. We always want to be trying to fuel weight training performance. Good training performance means good muscle retention. But that's not always the issue. Some people might need a little bit higher fats and do better on lower carb. And I think those are things to pick up on as you're dieting down and getting closer to your peak week. And within this initial dieting phase, you also have refeed periods, refeed days or a few days. And those are ones that take good notes on, take pictures, because these initial refeeds are perfect tests to give you an idea of what you should be carbing up on. So if you have to eat, if 300 grams of carbs all of a sudden fills you out and you're like, wow, that was great, I didn't take any fats and my digestion was awesome. It's like, well, that's probably a good idea for what you might be doing peak week. You have other individuals that you refeed them on 800 carbs and it's like nothing happened. You're like, wow, then maybe you're like, you have to add in some extra fats in those meals. And it's the same idea of the guys like having burgers and stuff and all of a sudden they're like fuller. It's the calorie density has to be much higher for some individuals. Yeah. So that's when like, okay, you need some fats while you're carbing up, and that helps those carbohydrates stick in a sense. But that's the initial diet that you should be going into your show. And it shouldn't be quite as much of a guessing game because you've already been testing these things and know how your response is, leading into your peak week.
And with that, I hate to break you all, but the burgers and fries is not a magical refeed meal. But so what we're looking at here is what is the ratio of carbohydrates to fats when we are doing these test refeeds throughout the contest prep, right? And maybe if your first refeed is not very successful, testing different ratios of carbohydrates to fats will give you more information by the time that you come back to peak, right? But it's the first time you refeed, it's fantastic. They look great. Digestion's on point. They fill out fantastically. Then you probably have a pretty good idea that as they go along the dieting process, that it's probably going to not only their diet maybe look similar, but their refeed are going to look that similar. So what is the goal when we're trying to peak and refill out along those lines, right? So I think that the thought process should be to understand that as we are built physiologically, we have a lot less intramuscular triglycerides, so where fat can be able to fill us out, then we are going to be able to absorb glycogen in order to fill out, right? Just as John kind of pointed out, not only is performance fueled by glycogen, but our muscle cells are a little bit more predisposed to utilize that a little bit quicker than fats, right? So every time we go into a peak week, it is going to be a little bit more geared towards carbohydrates. What's going to be the variable that changes is the ratio of fats and carbohydrates that we use. So with that, timing of fat within the week can kind of change, okay? So this is where we need to get into kind of how aggressive we get into the refeed process and where you start that with individuals. So some people are going to start somewhere as early as Tuesday or Wednesday with that refeed process. The individuals that we have a hard time carving up, it takes a lot to get to them. We're probably throwing in a little bit of fat in those carbohydrates to help, kind of like John pointed out, the food stick a little bit. Then you have those people that are super sensitive to refeeds, right? It may only take Thursday, Friday to get them done, or even maybe half of Thursday and into Friday to get them fully filled out, right? So looking at that kind of help you see where we're going to throw in fats during the carb up process.
Yeah, I think that's kind of getting into the timing aspect of how you're responding to these foods. And that's something that you should have picked up on your refeed days, right? So if you're you have your refeed day, your carb up, and the next day you look all watery, and it takes you like 3 days before you like finally look super tight and good. Well, maybe a front loaded load would be best early in the week, right? So you're like, all right, 3 days it takes me to look my best. So like Wednesday or Tuesday is when I need to hit my front load, and then I can tighten up throughout the rest of the week. Or you have that person that they hit a high day, the next day they look phenomenal. You're like, all right, well, you could probably do this closer to your show and not front load, because you kept doing that for the rest of the time. Front load, you're going to have to keep doing it every day to keep getting that full look. So the timing aspect is definitely a point to make. And then I think it's good to talk about, like, you are mainly having glycogen stores in the muscle. That is the biggest component that's going to be filling you out. So when you're looking at these meal structures, we are looking at, for a lot of people, if you're truly going into a contest prep, you're very depleted, and especially if you have a large amount of muscle mass, it's going to take a larger amount of carbohydrate to fill out. So we want to really prioritize carbohydrate, and we can do that by, for one, probably making that your primary macronutrient. So you might have protein down a little bit. For one, protein, it does cause a decrease in appetite. So we want appetite to be pretty high. We want digestion to be pretty quick so we can put a lot of carbohydrate in. Fats do tend to slow down digestion. So having really high fats in your meals with carbohydrate, it might make it hard to get enough food in. There's some guys that need over 1,000 grams of carbs a day to fill out. So if you're filling up space with vegetables and protein and all this other stuff, it's just taking away from that carbohydrate volume you could be taking in, and also just probably limiting your your digestion as well. So I think that's for one, number one, your priority. But when to add in fats, like you're saying, Luke, is definitely when you have a guy do a high carb meal, protein meal, and they're just burn right through it. Their weight's back down. You're like, oh man, we can't add any more volume of carbohydrate. This guy's gonna walk on stage looking like he's like 8 months pregnant. So then you could add in some fats. You just have to make those meals more calorie dense.
Yeah.
Some guys go out for their burgers or whatever. That's a real roll of the dice, in my opinion. Essentially, you're just trying to add a lot of fat in. So you could do that and manage it in a controlled manner by just adding in fats.
And I think one thing to understand too is, if you time this appropriately where you give yourself time, you can still be aggressive with this carbohydrate load and then come back, turn around and fix it, right? And this is one place where fats are a good thing to use, right? So as John was kind of mentioning, the ratio of protein to carbohydrates does drop a little bit during peak week. So a lot of times you'll see some of my guys eating 6-7 ounces of protein throughout the prep period, and then as we get into the carb up, we're eating 3 to 4 ounces with these meals with the carbohydrates we're consuming, to make sure that, like he said, we don't look 8 months pregnant on stage as we're trying to carb up, right? That protein will cause that filling effect. But as we get a little bit more aggressive, if we continue this carb process up and we see that after maybe 4, 5, 6 meals, we're not only full, but we're maybe a little spilled over, then we can look into not only a protein fat meal to help without the carbohydrates, to help extend that absorption process and allow it to continue to pull off that water, because we're not continuing low carbohydrates. But typically you're towards the end of the day there, right? So sleep leading into a show is a very big consideration for how good someone is going to look, right? Hunger is typically extremely high, even if we have been carving up. We don't want these people waking up throughout the night, because then that's just going to disrupt their sleep cycle and end up adding more stress to the body that's already there, right? So using these protein fat meals towards the end, if carbohydrate loading has already been sufficient enough, is a perfect place to throw in fats, in my opinion, to maintain sleep throughout the night, and where they won't wake up with hunger, because it is more has more of a satiety effect with the protein and the fats. And we're also allowing the carbohydrates, if they've gotten a little too aggressive, to continue to be absorbed throughout the night.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to make, is when you're watching this carbohydrate carb up process, you're watching your pictures and you notice, like, all right, the scale's going up and I'm now looking watery. It's like, okay, I'm starting to go too far with carbohydrate. Glycogen levels are topped off and they're now what people call a spilling over. So that's the point when you could go to your protein fat meals, and it might be earlier in the day than what we're saying, like for your last, it could very well be. It's not like you have to do this for your last meal. You have to truly just go off your pictures and how that response is. So going to a protein fat meal, you can definitely, you can control appetite and satiety as well, but then you're going to burn off a little glycogen and tighten up. I like to see people when we're like going into the day before the show, that night, you're almost just a touch watery, because I know overnight they're going to dry out, and then you're going to hit them just right. Like I've done this with myself too. Like by Friday night for a Saturday show, you look super dry and hard. Like, oh my God, this is incredible. Every morning I wake up flat as shit because I lost that bit of fullness and dropped enough water to where now I'm flat. Yeah. So you don't want to be super dry by Friday night. You want to be super dry like for prejudging in the morning. So if you are real filled out at night, almost a little watery, that's almost the perfect spot because you can dry up overnight. But if that happens to you early, just go to protein fats. Or even if you wake up and like, oh shit, I'm still watery, but I'm supposed to be carbing up right now. That's the thing to do. I go eat pancakes. It's like, well, no, there's times where they're like, damn dude, we're just not going to eat. Or you're super full and you look awesome. Like, no, we don't need to do anything. Or, hey, you're just going to do protein fats in the morning and that's it. So don't think that there is like this set approach you must do. You just have to go off your pictures, and there'll be time to use the carbohydrates to fill, but times to probably pull back and add fats in to tighten back up if you need to.
And it's not uncommon with that overnight sleeping process to see 3, 4, 5 pounds get pulled off, right? So like, I think when I did my show back in April, I was like 202.5 when I went to bed. And then the morning of prejudging, I was just shy of 200, like 199.5. And I mean, that's like a 3-pound clearance. And I like woke up so much drier. I was still full. We didn't have to be aggressive. And with the meals leading into the prejudging, and honestly, it was the best my abdomen control had ever been on stage, right? Because we had already done the carbohydrate process leading up into Saturday morning, where the meals I only had like a meal and a snack leading into the morning show that I didn't get on stage like 10 or 10:30, right? And I was up, pretty early to get my last coat of tan. So with that, the way you set yourself up for Saturday can tell you a lot of times how successful you are on the day of the show. So I would never be too afraid to be aggressive. Kind of like what John says, if you're super dried out Friday night, then not that that's not a bad place to be. You can still be aggressive with that last meal before going to bed, but not being afraid to be a little aggressive on the front end, because you will drop off that night leading to the show.
Yeah, it's if that was the case, if I was like super dry at night, it's probably one of those situations where you do want to hit that last meal pretty heavy. And then if you wake up to pee in the middle of the night, you probably want to take in some fluids and like some type of quick snack as well, so you don't have as much of a drop off at night. It's the time when you like get up in the middle of the night, you kind of glance in the mirror, like, all right, we're on, or we need to make an adjustment here.
Right.
So it's the situation, but I guarantee you, like every time you're going into this show, you're always going to look better, like super dry. So, in the mornings, don't worry about like I feel like if you're really having to load a lot in the mornings, you've kind of waited too long.
Right.
So it's really, you want to get full before the show, and then at the show, you're just kind of maintaining that. That's a little safer approach, but man, I think that wraps up like some carbs versus fats. I hope you guys get some good takeaways on how to utilize both. So, realize once you're doing in the dieting process, what you're best with using carbs or fats, monitor your refeed days, see how your response is, how many days you take to get dried up, and let that guide you during your peak week. Most of all, go off pictures and make the adjustments on the fly.